You're listening to The Deep Dive, because you want to get smart, fast on the really complex stuff. And right now, we're diving into Kashmir, an incredibly complex and frankly alarming situation. We've pulled together quite a range of sources for you here, some deep historical and political analysis, a look at what's driving the conflict today, even a hypothetical nuclear war scenario, a pretty chilling one set for 2025. And of course, very recent news reports from just this April. Our mission, really, is to pull out the most critical insights, maybe some surprising facts so you can understand the current flare-up and the long, long history behind it without, getting totally overwhelmed. What's really brought this front and center again is that horrific attack in Pahalgam, April 22nd, 2025. 26 people killed, mostly Hindu tourists. Just awful. And, well, predictably, India-Pakistan tensions have just shot through the roof. India immediately pointed the finger at Pakistan. Pakistan strongly denied it, called it a false flag even.
Yeah, the usual pattern, unfortunately. Accusations and denials.
And beneath all this, there's that terrifying possibility of, nuclear escalation. There was a study back in 2019 looking at a hypothetical war. Right here in 2025, it talked about 50 to 125 million deaths. Just staggering, not to mention the global climate impact.
Truly catastrophic potential.
So let's start unpacking this. It didn't just begin with the 1947 partition, did it? The roots seem to go way deeper.
Oh, absolutely. Way deeper. You really have to go back to 1846. The Treaty of Amritsar.
1846.
Yeah, that's when the British effectively sold Kashmir to a Hindu Maharaja, Gulab Singh. So you had Dogra rule established over a population that was overwhelmingly Muslim.
Right. A Hindu ruler, Muslim population. That sounds like built-in tension from day one.
It certainly set the stage.
Yeah.
And that initial Dogra rule, well, it was pretty oppressive. We're talking forced labor, heavy taxes, violence.
So resistance started early then?
It did. Understandably, people pushed back against that kind of rule.
Okay, so fast forward over a century. 1947. Partition. British India is divided into India and Pakistan. Kashmir is majority Muslim, borders the new Pakistan, cultural links. You'd think it would join Pakistan, right? Why didn't it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's central to everything that followed, despite the demographics, the geography, the culture. The Hindu Maharaja at the time, Hari Singh, he opted to accede to India.
Wow. Okay. And that decision immediately caused problems.
Big problems. It kicked off the first India-Pakistan War almost straight away in 1948.
Right.
And that's when India took the issue to the United Nations.
Ah, the UN resolutions, the ones calling for a plebiscite.
A vote.
Exactly. The UN called for a vote by the Kashmiri people to decide their own future. But, and this is key, it was conditional.
Conditional on what?
On both India and Pakistan withdrawing their troops first.
Which never happened. That vote never took place.
It never did. The conditions weren't met, interpretations differed, trust evaporated.
And the political positions hardened over time, definitely. India increasingly saw the accession as final, an internal issue. Pakistan kept insisting on the UN resolutions. It became a deadlock.
A deadlock that led to actual wars.
4 major wars, 48, 65, 71, and the Kargil conflict in 99.
Plus constant tension, right? Like the attacks in Uri and Pulwama recently.
Precisely. Uri in 2016, Pulwama in 2019. These incidents just keep the confrontational atmosphere simmering. And they really push both sides further down the nuclear path.
So failure to resolve it politically just led to more violence and higher stakes.
That's a fair summary. And that unresolved political situation, well, it created the space for the insurgency to grow.
Right, the Kashmir Intifada, starting in the late 80s.
Yeah, late 1980s onwards. A significant armed insurgency against Indian rule.
And India claims Pakistan has been backing these groups.
India certainly alleges that providing support, weapons, training. Some of our sources point to that as well.
Was there a specific trigger point for the insurgency really taking off?
Many point to the state elections in 1987. They were widely seen as rigged. That really damaged faith in the political process for a lot of people, pushing some towards armed struggle.
And India's response has been, intense militarization.
Extremely intense. Indian-administered Kashmir is one of the most militarized places on Earth. You're talking about somewhere around 700,000 troops.
700,000. For a population of about 12, 13 million.
Roughly, yes.
Yeah.
Military, paramilitary forces.
Oh,
It's a huge presence.
And with that level of militarization often come abuses?
Sadly, yes. Numerous human rights organizations have documented serious allegations. Killings, torture, sexual abuse.
The reports mention rape being used as a weapon of war. It's horrific.
It is. And the impact on women is devastating. You hear terms like grieving wives, martyrs' mothers, and the phenomenon of half-widows.
Half-widows, what does that mean?
Women whose husbands have disappeared, presumed dead maybe, but with no official confirmation, no body, left in limbo.
God, that's tragic. And adding to this are certain laws, right? Giving security forces a lot of power.
Yes, immunity laws like the PSA Public Safety Act and AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. TADA was another one. These give forces broad powers, search, arrest, even shoot, often with very little accountability.
So prosecuting alleged abuses is difficult.
It's extremely difficult. You often need permission from the central Indian government, which is rarely granted.
Things like the killing of Burhan Wani in 2016 or those chemical weapons allegations, they just highlight how bad things can get under these conditions.
Exactly. It's a deeply volatile and tragic environment shaped by these laws and the ongoing conflict.
Okay, let's rewind a bit again to partition politics. It wasn't just Kashmir facing these accession choices, was it?
No, it wasn't. The whole process with the princely states was messy. They had some autonomy, but Mountbatten was pushing them to choose India or Pakistan.
And the way boundaries were drawn sometimes seemed strategic, like Gurdaspur district.
That's a key point some analyses raise. Gurdaspur going to India, arguably against the demographic logic, gave India a land route to Kashmir.
Right, and affected Pakistan's water access too, and the Indus.
Potentially, yes. Affecting the headwaters of rivers vital to Pakistan. That issue itself, water, becomes huge later with the Indus Waters Treaty.
It feels like there were inconsistencies. Look at Junagadh and Hyderabad.
Good point. Both had Muslim rulers but Hindu majority populations. India annexed them, using force in Hyderabad's case.
So, a different approach than Kashmir, where the ruler was Hindu but the population Muslim.
It does seem inconsistent, yes. And then you layer on the shifting political stances. Nehru initially talking about a UN referendum.
And Sheikh Abdullah, the Kashmiri leader.
He initially agreed to accession with India, but later seemed to favor independence, a sovereign Kashmir. He was even ousted and jailed by India later on.
So lots of political maneuvering, broken promises maybe.
Certainly shifting positions and a lot of mistrust built up early on. And internally within Jammu and Kashmir, things weren't stable either.
You mentioned rigged elections before, 51 and 87.
Those are frequently cited examples. Plus, the changes in leadership titles from head of state and head of government to governor and chief minister, signaling a reduction in autonomy over time.
And attempts at resolution, like the Tashkent Declaration or Simla Agreement, they didn't stick.
They addressed immediate crises, like ceasefires after wars, but didn't resolve the core Kashmir dispute. For many Kashmiris, the idea of independent Kashmir just faded.
All this instability, it feels like it set the stage for what India did in 2019.
Absolutely. August 5th, 2019, a really pivotal moment.
That's when India revoked Article 370.
Yes, revoked Article 370, which gave Jammu and Kashmir its special autonomous status, and also scrapped Article 35A.
35A was about land ownership rights, wasn't it? Preventing outsiders from buying land.
Exactly. Protected residency and land rights. At the same time, India split the state into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, directly ruled from Delhi.
And this was done without local consent.
Without the consent of the state assembly, which was suspended at the time. It was a unilateral move by the central government.
How is that seen by Kashmiris?
By many as a betrayal, a violation of the terms of accession, and seen by some as an attempt to fundamentally change the region's demographics.
And the immediate aftermath was intense. Communication blackouts, more troops.
Reports described a complete lockdown. Internet cut off, phones down, heavy military presence, politicians detained. People called it a jail.
Which brings us right up to this recent Pahalgam attack. How does it connect?
Well, the attack itself is shocking, targeting civilians, specifically asking their religion before shooting. That signals a deeply worrying sectarian element.
And it's the deadliest attack on civilians there in years, right? Since 2000.
Over 2 decades, yes.
Yeah.
It shatters any sense of normalcy that might have been returning and pours fuel back on the India-Pakistan fire.
And the reactions were immediate. Modi condemning it, vowing punishment, blaming Pakistan.
Yes, linking the group that claimed responsibility, Kashmir Resistance, directly to Pakistan-backed outfits.
And Pakistan's response, denial and counteraccusation.
Pretty much textbook. Deputy PM Dar called it the blame game, demanded proof. The defense minister floated the false flag theory again.
Some analysts pointed to the timing, too. U.S. Vice President visiting India, Modi heading to Saudi Arabia.
Yes, speculation about whether the timing was intended to send a message or disrupt diplomacy. It's hard to know for sure.
And India's actions since the attack, what have they done?
Several things. downgrading diplomatic ties further, closing the Atari border crossing.
And the Indus Waters Treaty, that sounds really serious. Suspending it.
That's the most alarming move reported, though details are still a bit murky. There are unconfirmed reports India might be limiting water flow into the Chenab and Jhelum rivers, which flow into Pakistan.
How's Pakistan reacting to that possibility?
Very strongly. Officials have called any unilateral suspension an act of war. They've talked about responding with the complete spectrum of national power.
That phrase, complete spectrum of national power, sounds like a veiled nuclear threat.
It's generally interpreted that way, yes, underscoring how vital that treaty is for Pakistan's water and agriculture.
And other measures. Blocking Pakistan's government on Twitter, calls to ban movies.
Yeah, actions reflecting the high tension across different domains, diplomatic, economic, cultural, informational.
It just feels incredibly dangerous, which leads us back to that nuclear dimension.
It's the elephant in the room, always. The fact that this long, bitter conflict is between two nuclear-armed neighbors.
Tell us about that hypothetical scenario for 2025. How does it unfold?
Well, the Rutgers study imagined a trigger event, like a major terrorist attack, perhaps on the Indian parliament.
Okay.
India responds with conventional military force, maybe pushing into Pakistani territory.
And Pakistan feels overwhelmed conventionally.
In this scenario, yes. And to stop the Indian advance, Pakistan resorts to using tactical battlefield nuclear weapons first.
First use by Pakistan. Wow. And India's response.
India retaliates with its own nuclear weapons, perhaps targeting Pakistani military bases with strategic weapons.
And then it just spirals.
That's the terrifying logic in this scenario. Pakistan hits back at Indian cities. India retaliates against Pakistani cities. It escalates rapidly out of control.
To the point of full exchange.
The scenario suggests Pakistan might eventually use its entire arsenal, estimated at maybe 150 warheads then, and India responds with a large part of its own stockpile.
The direct death toll you mentioned, 50 to 125 million.
That's the immediate estimate in the study. Just incomprehensible numbers, cities obliterated, infrastructure gone.
But the effects wouldn't stop there, right? The global climate impact?
Exactly. That's the other devastating part. The huge fires from the nuked cities would create massive amounts of smoke, black carbon,
And that
and block sunlight for years.
creating a nuclear winter.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
A significant drop in global average temperatures, less rainfall. Figure 2 in the study shows how the climate responds. It's dramatic.
And the impact on food.
Catastrophic. Reduced sunlight, colder temperatures, less rain. It would devastate agriculture worldwide. Figures 3 and 4 show the projected drop in plant productivity.
Leading to famine.
Potentially mass famine. Millions, maybe billions, could face starvation far away from the actual conflict zone.
And this isn't just theoretical risk if nukes fly, right? Even a conventional war is dangerous.
Absolutely. Because the risk of escalation is always there. Miscalculation, panic, a hair-trigger response during a crisis.
U.S. intelligence was worried about this decades ago.
Yes, declassified reports from the 80s and 90s show U.S. intel was concerned about escalation, even about potential Indian strikes on Pakistani nuclear sites, like the Karachi power plant.
An attack on a nuclear plant, the radioactive fallout.
Could be horrific, another layer of disaster.
So we have this incredibly dangerous situation, nuclear weapons involved, deep historical roots, but diplomacy seems stuck.
That's the tragedy. Over 70 years of suspicion, hostility, bilateral talks, start, stop, end in stalemate.
And India and Pakistan approach it differently.
Generally, yes. India prefers to keep it bilateral, resist international involvement. Pakistan often tries to internationalize the issue, bring in the UN or other powers.
That disagreement itself must make progress harder.
It does. This diplomatic deadlock means there's no real mechanism to absorb shocks. So when something violent happens, like Pahalgam, tensions just spike immediately.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We've looked at the history going way back, the Dogra rule, the partition controversy, the rise of the insurgency, the heavy militarization, the human rights concerns, the immunity laws.
The political shifts, Article 370 being revoked in 2019.
And now this latest attack, the heightened tensions, the Indus Waters Treaty threat.
And always looming over it all, the potential for nuclear conflict with devastating consequences not just for India and Pakistan, but for the entire world.
The human cost is just immense, whether it's the ongoing violence or the potential catastrophe.
It really is.
So it leaves you, the listener, with a really tough question to think about. Given this incredibly long, complex history, the deep mistrust, the current volatility, What possible pathways could even exist? Is there any way forward for a lasting peace, one that actually respects what the people involved want and need, especially in such a dangerous conflict, something to really chew on?